Hey guys, what's up and welcome back on the channel. It's been 5 years since I made one of my legendary videos about the bird opening from Black's point of view from Gambit. And now I decided to show you different kind of Gambit in the from Gambit. It's called Schlechter Gambit with amazing results for Black. There are only like hundreds of games being played in that variation from like Black's point of view and Black players, and a winning score and winning rate by Black is simply spectacular. Uh, I'm also going to show you a couple of my games that I made in that opening. You're just going to like it a lot, I know. I especially know because it's Gambit. You like Gambits. It's similar to From Gambit. You like that video so much. Now I decided to show you way better, way more, I'd say, reliable variation than the From Gambit, because there were some, like holes in the From Gambit just because that's the way it is. And let's go, Schlechter Gambit. So it appears after the following variation. After f4, we play like from Gambit e5. They take it, and then you just play knight c6. In a typical from Gambit, you just go with d6, sacking this pawn immediately, and then turns out that they can play some e4 going into the king's gambit positions, that they can play some knight f3 variation. And in order not to learn all those things, I just decided to teach you Schlechter's Gambit that scores way better in online games for Black. It's way less popular than the previous one, and simply white players, including some legendary bird players such as legendary GM from, I believe, Denmark, Henrik Danielsen, he also didn't know how to face this opening, and he had problems with it. So after like knight c6, they have to go knight f3 to defend it, and then you just go with g5. That's the Schlechter's Gambit. That's the most surprising idea for Black. And it's time to just discuss this position and to see what's so special about g5. Well, I just have to tell you that you're now threatening to push your pawn to g4, kick the knight away from f3, and get a pawn back on e5, afterwards taking by knight and getting like nice advantage in your development. There are like 4 moves by white: d4, which is the main one, and I would say side ones e3, g3, and h3. Let's begin with the least popular e3. You just kick the knight away. They shouldn't jump with the knight on d4. You just get a pawn back, going with d5, h5, bishop g7, knight f6, and so many other things, where Black absolutely doesn't have any opening problems. They all go after g4, knight g1, and here you go with d6. So just like you see, we're still going with some sort of like From's Gambit ideas, just in way better, and I'd say way not more logical, but way sounder way. So after d6, they capture and bishop d6. At the moment, we're threatening to go with the queen h4. And get ready to check one game that I found being played online, correspondence game, and one Blitz game of mine that I played in this year. So after bishop d6, queen h4 is obviously a threat. I'm showing you the game. G3. G3 is so logical. Somehow looks like it makes your bishop on d6 being shut off. That's one thing. Second thing, you can't play any longer queen h4. And everything looks so desperate. But of course, you know how much we like wing gambit ideas with h5, and we just go with h5 and h4. We would like to open the h file. We'd like to break it with h4, h takes g3. And after h4, this guy played bishop g2. Black played h4, threatening to take on g3, and played knight e2. He keeps on developing his pieces, castles, h takes, and knight takes. This is already a difficult position. If he goes with h takes, knight goes on h5, then you threaten to take here, probably queen comes to g3, and you can even consider some knight g3, queen h4 ideas. You can even consider, for example, some other developing moves. Even this move, knight b4, looks very interesting, going after c2. Knight e5 followed by knight f3, removing the defender around the king is also good, and you can just play whatever you like and it would be much better. This guy played knight g3, he played knight h5 anyways, and after knight e4 played queen h4. He was already completely lost. He put all his like hopes into removing the dark square bishop, and at first glance looks like it could be defendable for white. Although after knight c3, g3, you can play h3 because of bishop h3, knight takes, played queen h2, came up with the knight h5, threatening this rook. King is anyways weak. Played knight e5, simply he's just generating all his pieces around the white's king. And after knight e5, queen j3, rook g8, threatening mate. This guy, out of complete desperation, sacked and then resigned. He couldn't stop bishop h3. He couldn't stop queen g2 mate, and he simply resigned in the next move. So that's why I'm telling you, e3 is nothing to be afraid about in this Schlechter Gambit, because g4, knight g1, d6, a very important and very lovely pawn sack that looks like From's Gambit and its main ideas. And now I'm going to show you my game, knight e2. I only knew one more move here when I played my Blitz game. I just knew what is supposed to be the next move and that black should be good. So you see, I also don't know all these analyses, don't remember all these moves, but sometimes it's just important and enough to remember one move. I knew it's g3, such a nice creative move and creative way of coming up with the attack on the king's side. So when I play g3, I'm threatening g takes h2, queen f6, queen h4, and I just remembered that g3 should be the move and that he shouldn't take on g3, and that's what my opponent did, and that's the worst move. He should be actually going with a knight g3 or h3. This is my online game from this year, h takes g3 and bishop g4, and this is what I remembered. Now I'm threatening bishop g3 simply with checkmate, or we're winning a queen on d1. So basically my opponent played this, I came up with check, cannot defend himself with knight f4 because of queen on d1 that is hanging, and you can see the whole power of these bishops, and after king g1 I played bishop g3. You will rarely see nowadays games where you can beat up your opponents with the black pieces in 10 moves. And of course my opponent resigned. This game was played online this 2024. So after g3, I'm just going to show you like two best ideas. They can go with h3, in which case we play queen h4. An idea of queen h4 is not to give them any knight f4, to give ourselves possibility with bishop g4 at some point, knight f6, knight g4, knight f6, knight e4. So when they go knight g1, I believe knight g1 is the best move. Simply, they're just looking for the most promising square for the knight. Probably some other reactions could be knight bc3 and stuff like that. But you know what? Playing knight f6, for example, the most logical move. Playing bishop g4, another interesting move. Those are the most logical ideas. Of course, I would insist on like logical development. Then you play a light square bishop, for example. You threaten knight g4, knight g4, knight f2, but you also can go with bishop f5, for example, knight b4, or bishop f5 followed by a long castle. Black is so good. I analyzed knight g1, knight f6, knight f3, queen h5, and here it's interesting. If you play knight c3 to stop knight e4, then knight g4, and who's gonna stop knight f2? So basically, we're almost winning. And in case of, for example, bishop e2 to avoid knight g4, then you play knight e4, and who's gonna stop once again this one? And it's also very interesting that they can't go with this because simply you can consider sacking on h3, doing, you know, like I'm willing to say going all in, but we're not even going all in because our next move will be g2 and our mating attack is simply unstoppable. So enough with e3. I just want to show one more thing. If they take by knight, you play queen h4, threatening bishop takes g3. When they play queen f3, only move, knight f6. Uh, you know what? Now we're threatening bishop g4. Now we're threatening knight e5, knight b4, because the queen has just left control of the c2 square. So after d4, knight b4, knight a3, rook g8. Once again, we're threatening on g3, h1 consequently. King on e1 is weak, queen on f3 somehow. And I said black is slightly better, but from practical point of view, I believe humans are very bad at defending, and this is almost winning for black. Then another possibility could be g3. G3 is very similar to the From's Gambit. You just push your pawn up to g4, take on e5, and now when the white's knight, remember this, remember the following thing as a plan. Whenever you see the white's knight standing on h4, you just have to remove it by jumping on g6, recapturing by each pawn, and opening the h file. All of you who watched that video like 4 or 5 years ago about the bird opening in From's Gambit by black, you know how much I insisted on knight g6, h takes g6, and ideas to take advantage of the open h file and some initiative there. For example, if bishop g2, knight g6, they capture, you capture, they go castle, you go d5. And when you go d5, they can play anything else but d4, and then you just play bishop g7, which means they cannot play e4 because of potentially weak pawn on d4. And when they play c3, hoping to finally do e4, you just play f5. You're so much better. You have full control of the center. You have open h file. This is weak. King is weak. You have knight f6 to control e4. You don't even have to jump on e4, and full control of the game is in black's hands. So that's why I believe that after knight h4, knight a5, d4, knight g6, they should be going for the center. And I believe this transposes to From's Gambit, where I explained in that video also d5. If I did explain this, it's good. If not, then I'm just improving that file. And just like I told you, I'm now teaching you Schlecter's Gambit, and from my own perspective, it works perfectly fine in the practice for black. So if they take, you take by queen, threatening rook, afterwards h2, king is weak, d4, we just have full initiative. They gotta go e5, and now a very nice move, knight h6. This knight goes towards f5, going after the g3, also h1, going after the pawn on d4 in the center, and everything looks good. After like knight c3, knight f5, they take the pawn. We can't do anything, but now we go with c6. We're so over protecting d5 to be able to go with a typical Caracan or French queen b6 move. We're gonna go after both d4 and b2 pawns. And I also want to be able to take advantage of the queen being somehow misplaced and in the middle of nowhere. After queen f4, queen b6, they gotta defend it, and now c5. Open the game, open the game. Somehow their king is weak. You gotta open up the game. You definitely have to give yourself like an open game, lots of activity to your bishops, and that's why I think this game simply looks bad for them. Black is almost, from practical point of view, winning. If not, we're just fighting with like so much better game and so much better position. And now it's time to go for the third move. It's h3. h3 is a very logical move, and in Blitz so many times and so many players will go with h3. The point of h3 is to simply make g4 being more difficult. Of course, we go with the typical From's Gambit idea, d6. And now they shouldn't take. They shouldn't take, because if they take, then we capture by bishop, we threaten checkmate. There are so many weaknesses, and simply they can't hold and defend this position. They can go with e4. I found one interesting game where you recapture, of course. And now I found a game between strong IM Nikolovsky from Macedonia and Maximenko. They played like this: bishop c4. This guy played g4. That's the best move. And now he pins the knight. And now he's avoiding all kinds of, like annoying threats against the f7 pawn, like in some e5 openings. And after d3, h5. What I like about h5, it somehow solves the problem of the bishop on g4 that is unprotected in some bishop f7 lines. Somehow you're just defending the bishop on g4, giving yourself possibility to play bishop h6 at some point or knight h6, and black just looks good. It's a nice position. This guy played c3, he played queen d7, and it's very, at least to me, shocking how black, in just a couple of moves, managed to create like a very nice, tempting, and good attacking position. Look at this. He's going to play long castle, bishop h6 to swap off the dark square bishops, weaken his king on the dark squares, being able to go afterwards with some maybe knight a5 or whatever. Also, good possibility could be queen d6 as well, which even makes short castle worse because of some checks on the diagonal, g1, a7. Also, you want to go with a long castle. You also now overprotect d5 even better, and that's how black already has a great game. In that correspondence game was bishop e5, and this is a typical, I would say, and I would call it engine approach. They want to take on c6 and they want to play against bet pawn structure. Okay, that's a legit idea, right, by white, and that sounds, and that actually looks pretty okay. But when we play queen d6 to overprotect d5, of course, they take on c6, and now we're just having like very, very broken and seemingly very weak pawn structure. And yes, let's be objective. If you don't play aggressively, if you don't play actively, if you don't, I don't know, pull out some sort of like dynamics in this position, you're going to easily lose. But if you apply ideas that I just taught you, and I was just talking about, like try to attack, try to play aggressively, and to take advantage of the bishop pair, then you won't have any problems. In that correspondence game that that was played in 2018, the guy played d3, attacking the g5, f6, very flexible approach. Bishop knight e7, this knight goes on g6 and wants to go on f4 eventually, goes on g6, and now a5. So black, just like you see, doesn't only want to play on the king side, he also wants to play on the queen side as well. The guy played queen h5, bishop e6 to be able to play some bishop f7, a3, queen d7. He doesn't want to commit himself easily with a long castle because white also haven't made a long castle. But once he makes a long castle, now he plays a4, taking away like b3 square for the knight to defend. Played rook d on f1, bishop e7, and now played artificial castle, king d8, king c8, and played like this. And you know what? After knight e1, king c8, this one, bishop f7, I don't see any problems for black in this game. These correspondence guys were 2300 both, and I really, really somehow prefer black's chances in this game. Even though we both know that somehow, statically speaking, white should be a lot better, but dynamically speaking, bishop pair, possibility to do something along the b file just gives better chances to black. And after h4, h3, d6, everybody in these positions played d4. And now after d4, take a look at the following line. You take on e5. And they shouldn't take on e5. If they take on g5 by bishop, you play f6. And I'm going to show you a very nice game. Once again, correspondence game. The guy played bishop e3, kicked the knight away with tempo. Played f5 with tempo, because e4 was hanging, of course. d4 is hanging as well now. He has to defend it. Played bishop to f2. And now black didn't go for any knight d4 or anything because of knight e4 possibly, but actually played queen g5. He now threatens to go with e3. After a3 himself, played knight f6, played bishop e6, played long castle, and after this took on d4 with complete madness on the board, because if you take, he's gonna play e3 and going after both bishop and knight. He also threatens at some point some knight f3 or whatever. He also threatens something else in this type of the game. Simply, this is so difficult for black. Sorry, for white, and black eventually managed to win the game. That's why in this position and in this situation, we actually have to go with something else. So after like e4, knight f2, d2, this is good for us. If they go with bishop h4, e4, once again the same thing. You just play queen d4, you get a pawn back, and you're just fine. You hold the pawn on e4, threaten the pawn on b2, black is just fine. So the thing is, that's why they all play d5. And after d5, let me show you a blitz game of mine. It's one of my favorite online games, and I especially feel good when I win thanks to some of my good theoretical preps. So I played e4. I knew this one, and I knew that if they take, all I had to do was bishop d6, threatening checkmate in one move. Beautiful idea. Knight is hanging, and they're just falling apart. Black is just so much better in this position. And my opponent, after e4, probably he realized that I had something up my sleeve here, and she just played knight g5. Looks like e4 is hanging, c6 knight is hanging. And you know what? I was searching online and found that in these positions, I found few games and everybody took on g5 because it looks like we gotta move the knight. They will even take the pawn on e4. And this is my specialty. I was very proud of this move when I made it because I knew that there were some games after knight e4, and all games in the database is black won with a bishop f5. Bishop f5 is not a good move. Long story, I don't want to explain, you know why. So I played queen h4, threatening knight and the king. Only move is knight f2, and I played bishop g3. And this is what I remember. And I said I should be fine in this position. And here, then I keep thinking, and I couldn't come up with the best line. And I said, now I remember why it was so special, because of this move. And now all of a sudden, you just threaten to go knight b4 to go after the c2 and the long castles. My opponent captured. I played rook d8, harassing this queen. He played knight e2. I played knight f6, keep on developing myself. C takes b7, and I said if I ever want to sack on d2, I gotta keep under control this pawn on b7. So I played short castle. Also, I'm involving one more piece into the action, plus I'm avoiding b8. He played queen c1, avoiding all kinds of pins, but you know what? He's already so much pinned. And look at this. I cannot jump on e4 because of that knight. So what are we supposed to do? To remove it. I did a double exclam move. Rook takes d2. I believe it's a brilliant one. Knight e4, and my opponent just resigned. So just like you see, throughout the 2024, I played 2 blitz games with this variation. One I won in 10, another one I won in 15 moves. You have to admit that it's pretty good score. And finally, g5. After g5, we just have to see d4. I mean, fourth move, d4. That's the fourth line, and that's the most serious one. Of course, they take control of the center, attack the pawn on g5, and looks scary. Looks like we're down a pawn. We're just playing some crazy g5, and now even have to go with g4 move. But you know what, guys? We have an amazing position here. Get ready for the real analysis. So they can play knight g1. I'm just gonna give you d6, typical way of breaking in From's Gambit idea. If they play e6 to go bishop e6 d5, you gotta play like this. And after e4, I don't see why would we feel any kind of difficulty in a position like this. You can even play like bishop h6. You can play bishop g7. You can play so many things, and you're just fine. I would just play bishop g7 with a normal game. And when they play e4, you just take d5, knight e7, and try to move your knight to g6, play bishop c5, and play like that. I found bishop g5 a couple of games, bishop e7, queen e7. Now you're threatening the knight, and queen b4 reminds me of England defense. Queen b4 check. If they play knight c3, you take the central pawn. If they play c3, you take on b2. They cannot play like this because they're just falling apart. e3, queen a1, queen c2. I found few games being played like this. You just play knight g7, b5, knight a5. You just save your queen because you threaten to play queen b2, and after this, knight to e3, and black won in that game. Basically, he saved his queen and were clearly up a rook. And that's why after g4, only move is knight g5. And I also checked the online tendencies by white in this position, and absolutely everyone goes with knight g5. We go with d6, they take, and here comes my specialty. So what did I do in this position? I always took by queen. Actually, right now I'm showing you, I'm not showing you my games, I'm showing you my analysis. So this is a homemade stuff, and be very grateful that I'm showing this to you. So queen d6, and we're going after the d4 pawn. I checked online games. No one played the best move here, and the best move here is d5. But we're gonna analyze it shortly, but I'm gonna show you. Everybody plays the most solid one. And that was my question when I was preparing my file, and once again when I was preparing this line for you today. And I was wondering, like, how should we play? They play c3, hyper, like solidifying the structure, and finally, they will play knight e4, they're up a pawn, we have a broken pawn structure. This is the key moment. This is the key moment, queen g6, not allowing them to go knight e4, threatening h6 to trap the knight. And most common intuitive answer online in Blitz games by white is queen to d3. If d5, you just go knight e5. Bishop f4, knight g7. Knight e7, you're just so much better. Somehow they feel lots of difficulties because of the trapped knight. That's why instead of d5, they go queen to d3. That's the most common intuitive answer. And here, you also have to know something. You play bishop f5, provoking them to play e4, and when they go with e4, you go back. What's so special? Now the knight is trapped. Now you threaten h6, now you threaten f6, now you threaten long castle, and that's the way it is, simply. And somehow they feel lots of difficulties in a position like this, and not just that. You just have a very nice and easy game because the king is kind of exposed in the center. So after e takes, once again, after d4, g4, knight g5, d6, e takes, queen d6, they have to go with e5. Then I decided to do some sort of, like simply surf a little bit about these variations and to check how do they play in this variation. Only few games, I believe 6 games were played with d5. Do you know what kind of possibilities that out of like 500,000 games, all of a sudden, already in 7th move, we came to the only move for white d5, and only 6 games in their history of this variation were played like that. Anyways, you play knight e7, threatening to take the pawn. I want to show you one more online game before I conclude this line. Any c4, you just play knight f6, bishop g7, and you play h6, play like this, and black is fine. Any e4, you just trap the knight. Very nice online game, queen d4. Looks like rook is threatened, and they will just have a very nice and easy e4 square afterwards to save themselves. Knight f6. And e4 is the only move, threatening fork, where we play knight g6, avoiding fork. But this guy played knight e4, and he just tried to go after the rook. Black captured, and black played that famous g3 move. You remember how proud I was on myself when I found in one of my analysis g3 move as well. But that's a part of this line. So after h3, you took on d5. Black took on d5, queen d4, bishop f5, played long castle, and after this played queen e7. What more can you ask from one position? You have 4 minor pieces that breathe. You have a long castle, pretty much a safe king on c8. Open rooks on d8 and rook on d file and the queen on e7. This is beautiful. They can't play queen a7 because of queen b4. And the game was bishop d3, played knight b6, harassing the queen. Only move was this, bishop e4. Can you imagine how good is this position if you don't even have to take the queen? By the way, after bishop f5, rook d7, rook d4, bishop f5, rook d7 will be even fine for white. So after this, queen c3, bishop g2, queen e4, absolute domination. He can't make castle. You threaten queen f2 followed by bishop f3, and white just resigned the game. So that's a nice correspondence game. Another game in 20 moves by black. And finally, let's repeat the whole line again. So after like d4, which is the main move, you just go with g4, kicking the knight away. They gotta go knight g5, d6, e takes, and specialty is queen d6, threatening this pawn. If they play, and when they play the only move d5, and don't forget that's the only move if they wanna claim some sort of advantage here, you play knight e7, and after knight c3, knight f6, going after the pawn. e4, you play a6. Why a6? You're just avoiding and somehow safeguarding your queen on d6 in the center. Most of these guys play bishop e3, knight g6, queen d2, bishop g7, and you play short castle. Following and final position reminds me of the dragon. I very much enjoy control of the dark squares, mainly e5. I enjoy very much my bishop on g7. I want to go b5 and b4 on the queen side. I want to play rook e8 afterwards. I consider this position being absolutely fine for black. Hope that you enjoyed in this very short and brief presentation of how should we treat the bird's defense. Previously, 5 years ago, you had a chance to see the From's Gambit. I believe 2.5 years ago, I made a video that very much caught your attention. It's called Horsefly Defense, f4, knight h6. That's what I play mostly against f4, and I win all my games with it against better guys. Find it here on the channel. And finally, today I just decided to give you the Schlechter Gambit and to somehow update all those from Gambit analysis, because I know that there were like here and there some questions. So feel free, enjoy the analysis, and good luck with this stuff. All the best, guys.